You have a right to vote. Repeat after me. I am not afraid.
I am not afraid.
I am not afraid.
I am not afraid.
I will live for liberation.
I will live for liberation.
'Cause I know why I was made.
I know why I was made.
I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I will live for liberation, 'cause I know why I was made. I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I will live for liberation, 'cause I know why I was made. One more time. I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I will live for liberation, 'cause I know why I was made. I am an American. I am an American. I have the right to vote.
I have the right to vote.
Today we are honored to be here in honor of a man, John Lewis, who fought and lived for our right of freedom and our right to vote. Today we are also honored to have a speaker with us who was in the civil rights movement in the 60s, Reverend Ron English, who is an inspiration to me and others here in our fine city of Charleston, West Virginia. He is now the president of the NAACP Charleston branch, and he is going to come to speak to us on the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Reverend English, give him a hand.
I have come here today to honor the legacy of John Lewis. And if you are here to honor that legacy and don't mind getting in some good trouble, let the church say amen.
Amen.
Let the church say amen again.
Amen.
In a Baptist preacher, I just can't resist asking for that. John Lewis was the first speaker in the March on Washington. All of us remember what the March on Washington meant in terms of the I Have a Dream speech that Dr. King made. He was the last speaker, but John Lewis was the first. He was chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And he had the fiery rhetoric that he had almost to be calmed down by those who were elders because they thought that it was a little bit too much. But John Lewis was John Lewis. And from that moment, he became an inspiration to many of us because we were about his age. John Lewis was arrested more times than any other leader in the civil rights movement. But the march across the May-Pettis Bridge earned him the right that name would be changed from a slave owner to a freedom fighter, and is now known as the John Lewis Bridge. And John Lewis is still building bridges over troubled waters. That's why we are here today. We are inspired by his Voting Rights Act that has earned the image and the energy of all who have come here today. But I ask that you would first consider the reason for the resistance to the Voting Rights Act, since the right to vote is the cornerstone of the American democracy. It doesn't make any sense except for a ludicrous kind of sense. Would anybody in their right mind want to restrict rather than to expand the fundamental right in this land of the free and the home of the brave, except for the fact that from the very beginning, some were not worthy of the privilege because they were not counted among the privileged. And from that moment, the pendulum of democracy has swung from the privilege to vote to the right to vote. It just doesn't make sense unless you share the mindset of the 10% of the rich and the powerful who have the right and the privilege to vote over the restricted rights of the 90% of the rest of us. That's the real deal, and that is what brought us here today. Voting rights is no longer about civil rights. It's about expanding everybody's right to equal protection under the law, which means protection from any suppression or restriction to the right to vote. So let's be clear. The John Lewis voting rights protest is one that is inclusive of black and Latinos, Asian Americans and Indians, and yes, those of us who are gathered here in West by God, Virginia. So we come here to pay tribute to John Lewis, but to maximize this moment, to honor him, is also because we are here to protect us, our right to vote. We've been here before. The resurgence of states' rights rhetoric is just a recurrent expression of the same stuff, different day. Or in the words of Maxine Waters, same game, but different name. Finally, support of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act helps us to become really clear on who we are. How frequently have we heard the response to racial conflict in our nation that was revealed in the January 6th invasion of the Capitol, and folks saying, that's not who we are. Well, the reality is, that is who we are. And until we come to terms with who we are, if we don't recognize what we are and who we are, we can't change what we don't understand needs to be changed. We cannot heal what we refuse to reveal. We cannot change what we refuse to acknowledge. So come to terms with the fact that this is who we are. And we can change that by becoming supportive of right to vote and the right of John Lewis and the spirit of John Lewis that instills in us that right to vote. Finally, Senator Tom Scott of South Carolina said America is not a racist nation. I kind of agree with that, because racist is an adjective that describes the noun nation. But there is a virus and a disease of racism that has infested the nation from its beginning. And until we deal with the virus of racism, then racist will persist. Therefore, our voting for John Lewis Voting Rights Act is an injection into the body politic of the nation that still needs recovery from racism. Keep hope alive. John Lewis is here today with us in spirit to help us get in some more good trouble.
Thank you, Reverend English. Thank you. One person, one vote. One person, one vote. One person, one vote. One person, one vote. Listen, V-O-T-E, fighting for democracy. V-O-T-E, fighting for democracy. V-O-T-E, fighting for democracy. V-O-T-E, cheerleader today. And I will be a cheerleader for freedom and democracy. It's Mother's Day. And I have children. And I want my children to be able to vote. I want my grandchildren to be able to vote and live in a country that is free. So today we're going to call some children up here, some young people. And I'm going to introduce now Rhonda Regambe, who is a political analyst with the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy with DC Statehood. And after she speaks, we're going to have Takaya Smith, who is a youth and racist justice organizer. Let's bring them on. The young people, they gotta vote.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rhonda, and I'm a policy analyst at the West Virginia Center for Budget and Policy. Today I wanted to talk about the lesser-known parts of DC's history in hopes of further providing reasons to support H.R. 51 and support DC statehood. Most of us know that DC's location was a compromise. Chartered by George Washington, its location was specifically chosen as a balance between the North and South, taking land from Virginia and Maryland. However, what's rarely discussed is how the decision to take the land from already represented people to turn it into a neutral third party would ultimately shape the debates that we're having today. DC became the nation's capital in 1800, and the very next year, Congress took away their rights to vote with the Organic Act of 1801. Before the passage of this act, the white men in DC were voters of Maryland or Virginia, but the Organic Act gave Congress complete control over the district. So not only did the men lose the right to vote, but they also lost their congressional representation despite being overseen and controlled by Congress. At first, this only affected about 2,000 to 3,000 people. The Civil War proved to be a really pivotal time for DC's population. At the same time as our state chose to secede from Virginia and got the opportunity to decide how they wanted to be represented, DC's population was growing rapidly, and many of the new people there were freed slaves. From its conception, DC residents had been fighting for equal representation. The momentum from the civil rights movement, much of which also focused on representation, helped DC gain some of their rights to vote. In 1961, the 23rd Amendment was passed, which gave DC residents 3 electoral votes for presidential elections. The problem with that, though, is that they still don't have representation in Congress. And without someone advocating on their behalf, Congress continually made decisions without their consent. This remains a problem today, and why DC statehood is so essential. Today, there are over 700,000 DC residents, most of whom are Black. We know that the backbone of a solid and robust democracy is equal representation under the law. Voter suppression is nothing new in American history. Outside of the context of Washington, D.C., we continually see laws that suppress voters' rights, whether through gerrymandering or restrictive voter laws. As West Virginians, we must stand with D.C. residents and advocate for their right to vote, just as we got our rights to vote as a single state in 1863. I urge each of you to contact our representatives and ask that they support H.R. 51. It is time to start a new chapter, and what better place to do that than in our nation's capital? Equal representation for D.C. has been brought to Congress over 150 times since it became the capital. The evidence speaks for itself. People want their voices to be heard. Let's help ensure that every American gets the right to vote and participate in our democracy by supporting DC statehood. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. I'll give a round of applause again for Rhonda. All right, you all. I won't drag it out too much. Can you hear me? Okay. All right, my name is Takaya Smith, and I am one of the people who have gotten out of line. I grew up under the poverty line. I am black, I am a woman, and I am what some would call inexperienced, aka too young, or also known as learning too much. And I guess in some ways I'm pushing the status quo and mobilizing others to do the same. I'm a 27-year-old West Virginia native, and I organize because I am deeply concerned about my home state. We have the 4th highest unemployment rate in the country. That was reported in 2019 before the pandemic. We rank 45th in the country with quality of health care and deal with constant swipes at our public education. And we wonder why there is an exodus of young people leaving our state. Young people understand how crucial their vote is to combating and improving these conditions. That's why bills like Senate Bill 565, a statewide attempt at eliminating our early voting days, of suppressing our vote by eliminating our early voting days, gutting automatic voter registration, and increasing purges from the voter rolls must be combated at the federal level. With the John Lewis Act, that's a good place to start, and the For the People Act. I just want to say I appreciate everyone for coming out and Rise Up and Sally and Karen and Center of Budget and Policy and ACLU and all of our churches, NAACP and everyone who is constantly coming to the ground and doing the work for our democracy. So we need to continue to mobilize our young people to get into good trouble if that's what fighting for our rights means. And I just really appreciate you all hearing me out and showing up. We got a lot of work to do. Thank you. Thanks, Karen.
Thank you, Takaya. We need 100 more like her. And we'll be in good hands. Now, John Lewis was an honorable man who fought for our freedom and our vote. He always said, as we heard the good Reverend say, time for good trouble. Time for good trouble. Time for good trouble. Time for good trouble. Are these some good cheers, Sally? Sally told me to come up with some cheers. I had to come up with a cheer. I have been a cheerleader for 50 years, believe me. But it's time for some good trouble, some good cheers. So we need to go back home and cheer. We need to cheer in our homes, in our neighborhoods, in our churches. And we need to be out there to make sure that people understand that we're here for our democracy and our freedom. At this time, we're not going to let the ladies just be all the speakers, so we're going to call on some men, some young men. We've got Elon Baumwell, who is the policy director of ACLU. We've got Martise Washington. I've known him since he was a real young man, who was a youth and racial justice organizer. So we're going to call them forth so they can come and speak their mind and let us know how to get in some good trouble. Come on.
I don't know if I qualify as young, but I'll take the compliment all the same. All right, well, thank you, everyone. Again, my name is Eli Baumwell. I work with the American Civil Liberties Union of West Virginia. And with the ACLU, I get to work on a lot of different issues. But at least for my money, there's nothing more central, more basic, and more American than our right to vote. And yes, I know that this idea that all people have this right has always been more aspirational than a fact. It's a value that we pay lip service to rather than a right that we actually grant to everyone. But to quote a contemporary of a namesake of one of the bills that we're here to discuss, The arc of history does bend towards justice, and we've seen the right to vote advance and be expanded. But this arc has not been straightforward. It's lurched forwards and backwards, and when Shelby County versus Holder, gutting the Voting Rights Act, was decided, we all knew that voting rights were primed to take a step backwards. So it's no surprise that the past few years, we've seen attack after attack on this basic American right, led by the very states that that act was designed to keep in check. That's a crisis. Now, COVID-19 has also been a crisis, but we've learned something during this pandemic. We've learned that we can have the right to vote, that we can actually expand it, that we can make it easier to vote. We can make it more accessible. And no matter what lies we hear from some of the opponents of voting rights, we know that we can do this without compromising the integrity of our elections. So we've survived a crisis. We're in the middle of a voting rights crisis, but crisis can also be opportunity. And we have the opportunity now not just to protect these voting rights, but to expand them and get that arc moving forward again. For better or for worse, Joe Manchin has become perhaps one of the most powerful people in America with his swing vote. He will be deciding countless pieces of legislation and the fate of this country in a lot of different ways. Now that means that we, as his constituents, have the ability to shape America going forward. And we have the responsibility to use that power to reach out, to be heard, and to make sure that in this moment we ensure that he does the right thing for us, for West Virginia, and for America. Thank you very much.
Hello guys, my name is Marcus Washington. I'm not going to speak before you long. First things first, let's cancel the filibuster, okay? It's not doing anything for me, it's not doing anything for you, it's not doing anything for any of us, okay? We're struggling, we're out here hurting, okay? Second, the reason that I'm here today is because as a black young male citizen in Charleston, West Virginia, my rights are already on the line every day. But during the pandemic, more people voted with restrictions, hours cut, all types of things, and it worked. And we turned out in great numbers, and we did something amazing. We made a one-term president, and because of that, people got upset. And now you want to take my rights away again. And I get tired of fighting for it. John Lewis said, get into good trouble. I seem to always be in good trouble because I'm always out here speaking or doing something. But I'm tired of getting into good trouble. I'm tired of having to do this. I'm tired of having to speak. At what point will our senators, our representatives, not hear us? We just turned out in massive amount of numbers. The most people in America voted for the first time ever. Okay, these are numbers they've never seen on both sides. And now, you want to take that opportunity away from not just me, but from everyone. What I'm going to say is, pass HR, just pass the bill. And stop doing this to us. Stop treating us like we're not Americans. Stop treating us like our vote don't count. We just showed you that it did. We voted in massive amounts of numbers. During a pandemic, we wore our masks. We stood 6 feet away. We did our part. Now do yours. That's why I keep saying, cancel the filibuster. I don't want to hear about taxes. I don't want to hear about nothing else. If you tell me that my vote counts, treat me that way. Show me. Pass the bill. Pass the bill. Pass the bill. Pass the bill. Cancel the filibuster. Cancel the filibuster. Pass the bill. Pass the bill. Pass the bill. Pass the bill. All right, Miss Williams, here you go.
I know who our next cheerleader's gonna be. Martise is gonna be the next cheerleader. How's that? You know, no one's here today to speak about it, but if we don't have our right to vote,
Who's going to stand up and say, let's vote for the Crown Act? Who's going to say that making laws that discriminate against the way that my hair grows out of my head is wrong? Who's going to keep our kids from playing on the basketball team because they have dreadlocks is wrong? Who's going to say that I can't go to work with my hair in braids and be fired? And that is wrong. We have to be able to vote. We have to be able to speak. We have to be there to speak up and let people know what is right and wrong. As a cancer survivor, I can't straighten my hair. As a cancer survivor, I can't color my hair. I have to get up and wear my hair the way it is. Now, you can fire me, you can fire my kids, you can throw them off the team, they may not be cheerleaders or whatever, but that's wrong. So we have to be able to vote and to make laws to let people know the difference between what is right and what is wrong. Thank you. Everybody has a right to live. Everybody has a right to live, and they have a right to live because they were born in this country, and they have the right to vote. I'm going to sing a song again, and no, I'm not your soloist, that's my daughter. I'm a backup singer. But I'm going to sing, somebody's hurting my country, and it's gone on far too long. Yes, it's gone on far too long. I'm telling you, it's gone on far too long. Somebody's hurting my country, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. Somebody's hurting my freedom. Somebody's hurting my freedom, and it's gone on far too long. I tell you, it's gone on far too. I tell you, it's gone on far too long. Somebody's hurting my freedom, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. We won't be what? And we won't be silent anymore. One more time, and we won't. And we won't be silent anymore. Thank you so much. And I just want to thank all the groups and all the people that have come out today to support this. And thank you, Julie, and I thank you so much, Sally and Ann, and all the people on the committee, and Gary, and I tell you, this has just been phenomenal. We're not finished. No, we got a lot more to say. And right now I'm going to introduce someone that's going to come up and speak, and she's going to continue on with the MC. She's a wonderful cheerleader. She's an attorney, a civil rights activist. And Charlene Vaughn, come on down. She's with NOW. And you know, women had to fight for the right to vote. African Americans had to fight to vote. People of color had to fight to vote. You know, as a former Head Start director, I don't know how we sleep at night thinking about those children still down in the border, separated from their parents. I can't even hardly stand it, and I don't want to forget. I don't want to forget about our history. I see that Kathy Ferguson has on the 1619 project. They want to teach our history different so that we won't remember. We have to remember. We have to do things different. We have to go forward. So right now, I'm Karen.
I'm Charlene.
I said Charlene. Here you go.
Thank you, Karen.
Come on down.
Happy to be here. Good to see everybody out here. My name is Charlene Vaughn. I'm born, bred, educated here in West Virginia. I start next speaker, who is Miss Julie Archer. Julie is a coordinator, West Virginia Citizens for Clean Elections, For the People Act. Come on up.
Thanks, Charlene. As Charlene said, my name is Julie Archer, and I serve as coordinator of West Virginia Citizens for Clean Elections, which is a coalition of organizations working to increase transparency and accountability in elections, advance reforms to strengthen our democracy, and ensure fairness and impartiality in our courts. And it's really an honor to be here today with Reverend English, community leaders, and our partners and allies to stand in support of the For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and DC statehood. With legislatures in 47 states trying to make it harder to vote, it's critical that Congress pass these reforms to thwart these attacks and protect every American's right and freedom to vote. However, these attacks on voting rights aren't the only threat to our democracy. Our coalition formed because we recognized the negative impact money was having on all of our issues and our ability to address problems and challenges facing the state. Over the years, we've made some progress at both the state and federal levels towards strengthening our disclosure laws and countering the influence of special interests. But since then, we had the Citizens United decision, which undermined much of that progress, and now circumstances are much more dire and our democracy is in desperate need of repair. The decision severely hindered the government's ability to regulate political expenditures and tossed out restrictions on corporate spending, enabling third-party organizations to spend unlimited amounts on negative attack ads, and the result has been less disclosure and more secret money or dark money in our elections, making it harder than ever and sometimes impossible to know who's really paying for political ads, leaving us uninformed about who's trying to influence our votes and the votes of our elected officials. Fortunately, the For the People Act provides us with a path forward that can help reduce the influence of big money in politics, empower average citizens, and make democracy healthy again. Yeah. So we're going to make democracy healthy again. And the For the People Act will shine light on dark money, make voting simpler, safer, and fairer, and hold public officials accountable. And this is a real opportunity not only to transform our democracy, but also to help us start making progress on other pressing issues facing West Virginia and the nation. And as Eli said, it's all of us, we have the ability right now to shape America going forward, and we do have a responsibility to make our voices heard. So we ask that you please join us in calling on Senators Manchin and Capito to expand and protect voting rights, help us create a democracy that's representative of all Americans' voices and values by supporting the For the People Act. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. Our next speaker is going to be Kim Smith. Kim is president of the Kanawha Valley National Association of Women. Come on up, Kim.
Thank you. Kanawha Valley Now is very honored to be here to be part of this event. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act needs to pass, not just for us, but for all Americans. John Lewis stood on the Edmund Pettus Bridge and said, "Get in good trouble, necessary trouble." We as women fought 100 years ago, and we got in good trouble and necessary trouble. We fought for the right to vote, but that struggle continues to this day. It's not over. Picture this. Consider an elderly woman, homebound, She has no right, or she has no ability to get to a polling station. She needs a no excuse voter absentee ballot. No excuses. She has the right to vote as an American citizen. Consider, if you will, a single mother who works 1, 2, maybe even 3 jobs. She does not have the time nor the luxury to stand in line for hours on end to vote. We need to pass the John Lewis Voting Act for these women, not just because it's important, but because it is part of our society to have fair and free elections. So I think that we need to make sure that the filibuster ends, because without that, we can't pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. So in the words of Susan B. Anthony, I say, we organize, we agitate, and we educate. And I think we've done that here today. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kim. There was another speaker on my list. I'm not sure if he's among us. Reverend Marion Collins. Please step up. Last but not least.
It's good to be here. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. I had a bunch of notes prepared, but it's like that's not going to work out today. I wanted to be here. First of all, thank everyone for including me in this conversation. I personally believe that Pastor English should have been last because of his legacy, because of the things that he's seen. But I really appreciate me being thought of in this capacity. John Lewis is an important person to all of us, especially young African American citizens of this country, because we stand on his shoulders because of the work and the sacrifices that he made years ago. And I didn't think when he passed that I was going to cry. I'm not a crying guy, but I found myself in my office the day that he passed for hours kind of reflecting. It wasn't a really good day for me, and then I figured out why. Because somewhere along the line, I started to reconcile our past with our present. And that old epitaph started to ring loud in my ears that I used to hear when I was a young person, that if you don't learn from your past, you're doomed to repeat it. Somewhere along the line, I think we became complacent and comfortable with what looked like freedom, with what looked like equality. And because of that, we stopped fighting. We stopped voting. We stopped organizing. And that allowed a wickedness to creep up in society that has always been there, but it was dormant. And so for the past 10, 15 years, America has started to look like what she used to look like when my mother and my father were growing up. John Lewis was an intricate part of that change. And I know it broke his heart to see a lot of the things that he worked on started to rear its ugly head again. I didn't think any time in my lifetime that we would still be having some of the same conversations, fighting some of the same fights in the 2020s that John Lewis and others like him fought in the 1950s. But here we are again. This isn't our first rodeo. Here's the thing. We all know why they want to stop the vote.
In 2016, when the administrations changed and they won, nobody had a problem with voting. I can't hear nobody. In 2016, when the Trump administration came into power, nobody had an issue with anybody voting because they won. Now all of a sudden, they got their tails whooped. I said they got their tails whooped. They got it whooped and whooped good. Now all of a sudden, they want to look at voting, and they're right in our faces, are messing with our right to vote right in front of us. Unapologetically. Because what we found out during the last administration is that there are certain people who don't look like me that the law does not apply to. I said it once and I'll say it again. If Barack Obama had done half the stuff that Donald Trump did, he would be in prison right now. But when he was doing it, it's okay. Now that we sent him home, and check this out, we sent him home. We sent him home from home. Because a lot of people from our party voted early. He told his folk they'll vote early. Now all of a sudden, we got an attack on our voting rights again. They're trying to take away the things that John Lewis worked hard for, spent his whole life fighting for. And let me say this. It wasn't just John Lewis. It wasn't just Martin Luther King. It wasn't just Malcolm X. It wasn't just those singular guys we see in the history books. But it was a good coalition of black folks and white folks that stood together boldly because they believed America could be better than what it was. They literally believed that we could be one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty, justice, health care, women's rights, a good living wage, education, not just for some, but for everybody. And I've always said, if you have a problem with that word all, you are a bigot. If you have a problem with that word all, because all means people that look like me. All means people who serve the same God as me. All means people who don't serve the same God as me. All means people who don't want to marry the same people, don't live the same lifestyle, don't live on the same side of the street. All means all. And if you have a problem with all people voting, you are the problem in this country. Because I don't care what you look like, as long as you know what right looks like. A woman's right to choose what she does with her body is just right. I don't have the right to tell you what to do with your body. We will not want to be shot and murdered by the police department at an astonishing rate. It's right to protest and ask for them to treat us like humans and not like. And so here is us again in American history fighting for the same rights that John Lewis fought for over 50 years ago. Here we are, and the only way we're going to do it is to preserve our right to vote out all of these wicked devils that's in office right now. We reserve the right to vote out wickedness. We reserve the right to teach our children how to vote and why voting is responsible and voting is powerful. They are afraid of people like us. Because now, y'all, America has birthed a generation of people, different people to the polls, that's willing to stand out in the street again and look bigotry and hatred in the face and say, we're going to give you your eviction notice on voting day. That's what they're afraid of. Do you really think if Trump would have won one more time, we would be having this conversation? Of course not, because there wasn't nothing wrong with voting when he won. And we all saw what he did. When he got in there, he did exactly what he wanted to do. When he wanted to do it, with no checks and balances. Now all of a sudden everybody got a problem with Joe Biden for trying to fix a wicked and broken system. And so we have to keep this fight going. We got to get in some good trouble. And this ain't a fight for the fake. This ain't for people who are afraid. This ain't for people who are afraid to lose some friends on Facebook. Because let me tell you, my delete ministry is strong. It's going to take all of us to do this, and this is what America looks like. Because back when John Lewis did it, he did it with white people right beside him. He did it with all of the people, no matter lifestyle, no matter color, no matter where you're from. They all did it together, and that's what we have to do right now. I'm gone.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you. You know, we're all here today as part of a national John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Action Day, man. These kind of events are being held in over 150 cities across the nation today to demand the passage of the For the People's Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and D.C. statehood, and to address one of the greatest obstacles to the passage of civil and voting rights, one of the last vestiges of slavery, the filibuster. So, with that, I want to invite you to stop by this table over here before you leave, and where you can pick up a pamphlet with information on how to contact Manchin and Capito, because we want them to sign off on this. And we can make them do it, but we got to get on them. So after this, we're going to ask people to return to your cars, and we're going to do the voter motorcade. Anything else? Yes, ma'am. We also have voters. Y'all hear that? If you need to change your name or address for voters registration, they have cards at that table to do that also. You always putting people on the spot. We don't have that, but we want to thank everybody for coming out and supporting.
Voting rights have got to stay, ho ho! Hey hey! Voting rights have got to stay, ho ho! Hey hey! Voting rights have got to stay, ho ho! Hey hey! Voting rights have got to stay! Hey hey! Voting rights have got to stay!